Hello and welcome back. This is Charlie Pellerin again, continuing through the educational series of slide narrations for our 3-day workshop slide set. I'm going to take you through set number 4, the first of 3 diagnostics, your innate personality, the one you were born with. A little tutorial from Jung's work on finding your innate personality foundation. The 4 foundations, one of course in each of the 4 dimensions. I'm going to show you why matching team personalities, particularly project team personalities, to task is so important. We're going to draw an analogy between your innate personality and handedness. So just as I use both hands, I innately prefer my right hand for tasks with complex motor functions. Personality works the same way. We can and must use all 4 dimensions of our system, corresponding to each of the 4 personality foundations, but one is easiest and most natural for us. I'm going to look to find this at innate deciding and information preferences. Have a little short quiz for you that's amazingly accurate. I've used this in several hundred workshops and people relate with it and very rarely change. We're going to chart your team's personality distribution and see if it's matched to task. And I'm going to show you some people who succeeded by undertaking tasks that were naturally matched to their innate strength. And the previous system, this is what we covered in segment 3. So let's proceed. The images here are interesting. The one indicating this is the personality we're born with. Others showing innately how young ducks, for example, I guess they're ducks, have innate knowledge to follow mama. So the 4 foundations, again aligning with the 4 dimensions. People in the cultivating dimension care most about other people. They're great team leaders. People like to follow people who care for them. Next is the people who care most about relationships. They're great team builders because teamwork is all about relationship. Then the people who care most about creativity. There are idea generators in the blue. And finally, the people who care most about process, control, discipline, the managers I call them. Their mantra might be plan to work, work to plan. So early on, I had an interesting experience. I had a contractor called me and said that I've got a terrible problem with my project team. They can't close the project out. They can't finish tasks. They can't get things done. And I don't know what to do about it. I need a workshop. So I started a workshop with these people. And pretty soon I realized what the difficulty was. They were almost all blues. They had been blue from the start of their project. It was a very blue company. And under stress, they became one-dimensional blues. This is how it tends to work. We can all be 4-dimensional most of the time without stress, but when stress mounts, we become 1D. And so I was going through the workshop with these people and having a horrible time getting through it. I was getting tired and frustrated. And the second night, I went home so exhausted because they kept interrupting me, kept arguing with me. This is the nature of the blue personality, as we'll see. And I woke up on the morning of the 3rd day and I said, I got it. I've got the same problem with these people that the project manager hired me to fix. So I went in the next day and I said, this is a fix, folks. I mean, this is a get. A get means you get it. And here's the deal. Right now you are so blue, this is your problem. You cannot close out this project and you need to become orange to close this project out, get the requirements met and get the hardware shipped. So here's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to take all the people in your team who are over blue and find other jobs and maybe change out 30% of your people and probably your project manager, or get a good deputy and orange up so you can get this thing out the door. And I said, that may sound like a difficult thing for you to do or daunting for you, but if you don't do this, I can tell you what's going to happen. You're under enormous stress because you're overrunning all the time. You're not making progress. You're not making milestones. It's only a matter of time before management comes in here and they're going to impose orange on you, and they're going to do it in a really unpleasant way. And those of you blues are going to be seen by them. They won't know why, but they're going to fire you. And this is a hard way to move into where you got to go next. So I would urge you to do this. The project manager ignored my sage advice, and about 6 weeks later, they reorganized the project, put it into the commercial space segment of the company, which builds stuff to put on the shelf and sell under fixed price contracts. It's as orange as you can get. Moved out to project manager, moved out most of the people, finished the job, got it out the door, end of story. So I want to be clear here that when I'm talking about these blues and oranges, I'm talking about the people who are doing the technical work, by and large. The greens and yellows are still great contributors, and they have probably learned to function in their neighbor. The greens most likely are able to high function in blue. The yellows are most likely able to high function in orange. The yellows and greens bring this great personal side piece, and when yellows and greens can make it through the system, they are the best team leaders, because as you move up in a leadership job, the job's more and more about people and less about your technical abilities. So how am I going to find this for you? I'll show you my case. I innately prefer intuitive information. I innately prefer logical deciding. This makes me a blue leader, and this is the same system you're going to do, is figure out which deciding process you prefer, which information you prefer, and that'll tell us. So I mentioned this before, it's like handedness, so I'd like you to take your pen or pencil and write your name on your workbook cover, please. And then I give people a little time to do this. And now I watch for most of the pen and pencils to stop moving. Put your pen or pencil in your other hand and write your name on page 2 in your workbook. Then I ask them to report what they noticed. They typically say, boy, it was really hard, or I couldn't do it, or that was painful, or sometimes it's more legible, sometimes I can't read it. And I said, what I want you to do is understand that when we talk about handedness, being right-handed or left-handed, we don't say to anybody, I'm 60% right and I'm 40% left. What we say is I'm right-handed or I'm left-handed. I'd like you to do the same thing with the personality. Don't think of yourself as some percent of one color and some percent of the other. Name your preference according to your primary. And so once again, just so we all use both hands, we all use all 4 dimensions, but when I have a complex task like writing my name or something that requires a motor function, sort of a complicated motor function, I always go first to my right hand. You will always go first to this personality foundation when you have work to do. Okay. Let's take a look at each of these processes in turn. Let's look first at the deciding process. When I worked as a consultant, it was pretty easy to spot the emotional deciders. The first thing you notice is they tend to take events very personally. If management does something that seems stupid, it would emotionally upset them. They tend to make decisions on interpersonal values with emotions as criteria. So when I was the strategic advisor to the dean of the business school, he was a yellow relational leader, and he would start a faculty meeting off with something like, I want an outcome we can all feel good about. And my brain's going, what's that got to do with it? Anyway, that's the emotional decider. The logical decider sees events subjectively, uses rational values and thoughts as criteria. So how many of you have ever made a major purchase where you had to decide how you're going to do it? Like, for example, many of you bought a house or an apartment or maybe a car. And I want you to reflect on whether you used emotional deciding processes or logical deciding processes. How many of you raise your hands? I'm raising my hand so they can get this NLP programming effect. How many of you believe you used emotional deciding processes? Look around the room. Great. Thank you. How many believe you use logical deciding processes? Look around the room. Thank you. And I said, so let me show you an example from my own experience. When I went to move to Boulder, Colorado, I wanted to buy a house, and I reflected on how I made decisions in the past when I bought houses. What I realized was that I would look at all the logical side features. I would look at the rate of increase in property values, the first derivative in mathematical terms. I'd look at the cost per square foot. I'd look at the sun elevation angles. I'd look at the, in those early days, elementary school scores for my kids, on and on and on. So I'm thinking about this, and I said, I've always used only a logical side process, and what happened? And I realized I never bought, using those processes, a house that I liked. So I said, you know, Charlie, when you buy this house, by the way, certainly spouses have a big influence on this stuff too. At the time I was single, I was divorced, and it was just me. And so I could do this however I wanted. So I called a real estate agent up and I said, look, I'm going to be flying out to Boulder next week. I'd like to meet you at, say, 8:30 in the morning, and we'll get in your car. And the first house that feels good, I'm buying it. And I'm hoping I can have dinner, late dinner in Washington tonight. She was very happy. So we get in her car and we drive around. And the third house we go to, I walk in there and I look around and I said, this house feels good. I think I'll buy it. Wow, I said, at that point I had not seen the bathrooms, I barely looked at the kitchen. And I said, later I did buy the house and the house was fine. And I said to myself, Charlie, you really did it. This is really great. You went over and became an emotional decider. Then I looked at it a little more closely and realized that's not what I had done at all. I'd still done all the logical deciding things, and I want you to listen how I language it. And when you find your innate personality, I'm going to ask you to put a badge on that indicates that, and I can tell you if it sounds like you're speaking from that place or not, because we speak very differently from the two places. What I said was, it feels good, I think I'll buy it. That telegraphs I never left the logical deciding. I just allowed an emotional finding to slip into the bed of logic. So I hadn't changed at all. These preferences are tough to move. With regard to the emotional side deciders, I can't explain it very well because I'm not one, but there's a movie called Field of Dreams that I think shows it pretty well, Costner movie. And to sum it up, he says, I don't understand it, it just feels right. That's the emotional decider. So two deciding preferences. By the way, the community of people in the world split about 50-50 across these two processes, which might surprise you. The information preferences. The intuitors are insightful, scattered, creative, big picture perspective. That's what I am. If I'm anything, I'm an intuitor, maybe an overdone intuitor. I do scatter around. I have a hard time sometimes completing one job before I pop over to the next one. The sensor is observant and very organized, and when they read an article, they can recite the details. I'm much more likely, especially a few days later, to recite back the concepts. Let's look at an example from ordinary life. There's a traffic accident, and a policeman comes to the scene after they take care of the medical needs of these people. He goes up and finds two people standing on the street, and the first is a censor, and he says, tell me what you saw. And the censor said, well, that car on the right there, he was traveling down the street, I'm going to guess about 35 miles an hour. And I happened to notice that as he was coming into the intersection, he looked off to the left at this young girl standing on the corner in a miniskirt, and he started staring at her. And he didn't notice that the light had changed. This car on the other side, he was sitting at the traffic light in the other direction, obviously in a big hurry. He's kind of revving his engine a little bit. And the minute the light changed, he hit the accelerator and took off. The first car ran into him in about his front quarter, spun around 270 degrees, blah, 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 blah. The policeman's very happy. Just the facts, man. Writing it all down. He's delighted to be getting his data. He goes over to the other guy and says, now, what did you see? The intuitor. The intuitor says, well, I saw that accident, and let me tell you, if you could synchronize those lights better, you wouldn't have this kind of problem. That's the big picture thinker. Okay. So I've got a little exam you're going to take. I wrote this some years ago, modified it. Oh, probably hasn't changed about 5 years now. Modified it as I listened to people use it. And here's what I'd say about anything like this. I've never figured out how to make an examination of this sort that you don't have to imagine some context to answer the question. So the first thing I'll suggest is think about a context you're able to really be your natural self. For some of you, it's going to be at home. For some of you, it's going to be at work. So that's step one. So give that a moment of thought. Okay. Step two is, Carl Jung said, it's your job in the first part of life to build your innate personality on your foundation. And he said, in fact, people who can't or don't do that become schizophrenic. He said, it's your job in the latter part of life to build out the other three dimensions, dimensions being my term. And he said that if you don't do that, you'll never have a happy and fulfilled life. And so in the West, we have an expression, sometimes we call this midlife crisis. So you might find it easier, especially if you're over 40, or especially if you're working through some changes in your life now, to think back and answer the questionnaire as you would early in life, perhaps when you were 25 or so. Next, some of these are going to be tough choices for you. Just pick whichever one's more true and check it, and don't worry about the answer, please. Just go ahead and do it. And then finally, I urge you to do this fairly quickly. The longer you spend on this, the more likely you are to be thinking about how you want to be or how you'd like to answer the questions rather than who you really are. So let's take a look at the little test. It's in your workbook on page 2. I'll give you one example might make this clearer for you. For the emotional decider, harmony in relationships is an intrinsically good thing. They want it. For the logical decider, harmony is a means to an end. And so I filled this out as though I would have filled it out, and you can see that I'm, according to this exam, I'm very, very strong blue, which I think is probably right. If you're making the inquiry earlier in life, as I suggested, you might want to just put the questions in past tense, as in harmony was intrinsically valuable to me when I was 20 or 25, and blah, blah, blah. So make that shift yourself, and it's easier than me making 2 test forms for you. So check all the boxes, and when you get through, I'd like you to circle the side with the higher score. Don't worry if it's 4-3. Don't worry about that for now. We've got lots more time to refine this. If it's a close result, just total it up and circle the side that has more check marks. This little coding sheet I think is pretty intuitive. If you're, you can relate this back to the XY system. For example, if you're an emotional decider and you like intuitive information, you're a green, and so on down this chart, which is also reproduced in your workbook on page 3. So if you have any difficulty in figuring out which badge you have, ask one of us to help, or ask somebody that's around you that looks like they know how to do it. Then you're going to come up here, and the leader badges are on a table or a chair, and pick out the one that matches you, clip it on you where you can see it, and then please go up and write your name in the proper place on the flip chart, which your second chair has prepared for you by now, hopefully, so we can all read your name. And then as you sit down, go ahead and record the other people in your team's names as they write them down. This might be a good reference for you later. So now we're going to look at the distribution of the team personalities. I'd let the group discuss this, but here's what I like to see. I like to see a group that has a nice distribution with good representation of everyone. If it's a project team in early phase, I like to see lots of blues. If it's a team doing a task in late phase project or discipline tasks, like I work a lot with the safety and mission assurance organizations, and orange is what they need. It's a very discipline-oriented job. So talk about it, and I think what I would worry about is a team that was grossly lopsided in one side or the other. Most of the technical teams I work with tend to have more people on, which would you guess, on the emotional side or the logical side? How many think it's mostly emotional side? Raise your hand. How many think it's mostly logical side? Raise your hand. Yep. I think there's a preference of people who undertake technical learning and technical jobs to be logical side deciders. I really do. So here's some people who've been enormously successful in life, I think living in their innate dimension. Mother Teresa, Nobel Peace Prize, many great things, operating in her green. U.S. President Jimmy Carter, widely regarded as a weak and failed president. He was a minister before he was elected. In later life, he again, Nobel Peace Prize, become world famous, invented Habitat for Humanity. When he got out of the president's job and could go do what matched his innate strength, he was just great. George Bush, who I have very little use for, then you wonder how he got elected president for his second term. And I think it's basically he's an affable, likable yellow personality, and he used that. Having people like you is a big deal in a presidential election. Someone you may or may not know, black comedian Bill Cosby, very interested in family and relationship issues. In the blue, of course, the iconic Albert Einstein, and a man who's becoming rather famous as kind of a new Carl Sagan. Neil deGrasse Tyson writes a lot of books about astronomy, happens to be the curator at the Museum of Natural History in New York City. And then Jack Welch in the orange with his always be number one or number two. And I'd say Margaret Thatcher in the orange, known for chopping social programs in favor of the military, this kind of thing. So each of these people succeeded in their natural strength, and you can too, and that's the message. Okay. That completes that section. The next piece is slide narrations 5. I'll give you a little preview. Continuing with the diagnostics, we're going to talk about selecting a job that matches your innate strength. What does it mean to be 4D able? The scorpion and the frog, a fable. We're going to spend some time with each of the 4 personality types using our amber structure, what these people each bring their attention to, their mindsets they hold, their behaviors, and the results they create. We're going to look at the percent of managers who are incompetent and why they're incompetent. So I'm going to ask you later to guess what percent of managers are incompetent, and we'll see what you come up with. Here's where we've just been. And that completes narrative set 5. And thank you very much, and I'll see you soon for set 6.